Take note that no disturbing images were used in this video news report, since the case is disturbing enough as it is. Also, all black and white images shown throughout this video presentation are originals from the old incident, while the color photos were recently taken of the Dyatlov Pass area. In the night of what is believed to be February 2nd, 1959, 9 Russian university students hiking and skiing in the wilderness of the Ural Mountains died mysteriously. Theories of their demise range from natural disasters to a military cover-up and even an encounter with aliens or a Russian bigfoot. A view of the tent as rescuers found it on February 26, 1959, 24 days after the incident. Forensic analysis would later show that the tent had been cut open from the inside and all skiers fled in their socks or were barefoot. The original group led by Igor Dyatlov consisted of 8 men and 2 women, but one turned back as a result of chronic illness. Most were students or graduates of Ural Polytechnical Institute, the most prestigious university in Russia. All members were highly experienced in long ski tours and mountain expeditions, and had obtained certifications in both. Some of the students already had their bachelor's degree and were in the process of obtaining an advanced degree. Their backgrounds ranged from construction engineering, radio engineering, economics, geology, and one had previously been in the military. Diaries and cameras found around their last campsite made it possible to track the group's route up to the date preceding the event. The group of well-educated students thoroughly documented their trip because it was a requirement to obtain their master's hiking certification that they all deeply desired to have, which is the highest certification in Russia at the time, and would enable them to teach hiking classes themselves. On January 31st, 1959, the group arrived at the edge of the highland area and began to prepare for climbing and skiing the snow-covered mountainous area. In a wooded valley, they cached surplus food and equipment that would be used for the return trip. The following day, February 1st, the hikers started to move through the pass. As a snowstorm approached, they made camp on a flat area and secured the large 3-layered tent to the ground on a mountain named Dead Mountain, so named by the native Mansi tribe because it's devoid of animals and trees as a result of its high elevation. Years earlier, but not on the same mountain, 9 native Mansi warriors were found dead, but cause of death could not be located. It should be mentioned that the Mansi are extremely skilled at hunting, and the most important role in Mansi life belonged to shamans. The group knew that they were safe from avalanches in their tent, since the mountain above them only had a 16-degree slope to it, making dangerous avalanches impossible, and not wanting to lose the ground they had gained, decided not to go down the 25-degree slope further away to take shelter in the tree line 1 mile downhill in the forest. The minus 20-degree temperatures and wind chill of minus 40 degrees ensured that anyone would die of hypothermia within 5 to 6 hours without any protective gear. After the university students didn't arrive back at school from their scheduled trip, a massive search effort was launched and their bodies were located weeks later. 2 of the bodies were found around the remnants of a makeshift fire. 3 of the bodies were found in what appeared to be positions that would indicate they were crawling back to the tent, and the 4 remaining students were found 2 months later furthest from the campsite, nearly a mile away, in a snow-covered, tree-lined ravine, having suffered from massive internal injuries. Although none of them had died as a result of falling in the ravine according to the pathology report, they were all huddled around a fire that had burned out, and yet there was an unused stack of wood by the fire. It was presumed that they fell asleep with hypothermia while the fire was burning, and once the fire burned out while they slept, they died. Several bodies in the ravine had massive injuries consistent with a high-speed car crash or from falling at terminal velocity, which could not be explained by the medical examiner based on the condition and location of the bodies. The snow in the ravine was at least 10 feet deep according to search team members, and was at least 4 feet deep at the time the students traveled through the area, which would have dramatically softened any fall into the ravine, and the ravine was tree-lined and sloped on the sides, not straight down. The injuries were also very strange. The pathologist stated that the rib bones on one of the victims was crushed, causing them to fragment into their heart, but no open skin wound was on them, making it so that the bones would have had to have burst from the inside. The pathologist had no explanation on how this type of damage would be possible by a physical event. It should be noted that this pathology report was not released until decades after the incident. Also negating the avalanche scenario is that investigators saw footprints leading away from the tent, with no obvious avalanche damage noted to the area or to the tent, which was still anchored to the ground, and everything inside was neat and tidy. The camp stove also was not set up yet, so carbon monoxide poisoning and other campfire-related issues can be ruled out. An ice axe was also found standing on its end outside the tent, along with a flashlight that was left on the on position. The batteries were obviously dead in the flashlight, having been left on for weeks. No indication of problems were located in any of the journals left by the students, also indicating it was a sudden event. The pathologist stated that the victims died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. Evidence from the camp showed that all group members left the campsite of their own accord, on foot, and it appeared that one group exited the tent through the front, while the second group exited through a cut they had made in the back of the tent. An open container of cocoa was left in the tent, as well as some sliced meat located in a cloth, with everything else very orderly. To further dispel the theory of an attack by the indigenous Mansi people, Dr. Boris Vazrandeni stated that the fatal injuries of the 3 bodies could not have been caused by another human being, quote, because the force of the blows had been too strong and no soft tissue had been damaged, end quote. Forensic radiation tests had shown high doses of radioactive contamination on the clothes of a few victims, 2 pants and a sweater. Keep in mind that this group of skiers and hikers were extremely hardy, and were not the type to be scared of anything. For example, a member of the group on a previous trip chased off a bear with nothing more than a hammer. Another member of the group on a previous trip was bitten by a snake, and while hiking the 50 miles back out of the forest to seek medical attention, was keeping her companions in high spirits. And a third member of the group on another trip was accidentally shot by a hunting rifle, and yet didn't complain and continued on. Note that no members of this group on this trip had brought a gun with them. These examples were provided in order to show that this group of extremely experienced certified hikers were not prone to panic in extreme circumstances, and to the contrary seemed to thrive in the extreme. A strange part in the story was that the KGB was spotted at every turn, and there was pressure to even bury the bodies in the mountains, in part because the Russian government didn't want to publicize the deaths, but also because the Russian Air Force was documented as stating that they would not transport the bodies off the mountain unless the bodies were first put into zinc-lined caskets for their protection, which may have been a result of the bodies' very unusual appearance. The bodies had turned a dark brown orange, which some said appeared to be like that of a suntan, and yet they were all buried in deep snow when discovered. Although the victims were in their 20s, all their hair had inexplicably turned white, which later couldn't be explained by the families or the 2 pathologists. Multiple KGB agents were also spotted by family members during the funeral, which was obviously not a normal occurrence, and the reason was never explained later by the government. Another group of hikers, about 31 miles south of the incident, reported that they saw strange orange spheres and white spheres in the sky to the north, likely in the direction where the incident took place on the same night. Similar spheres were continuously observed in adjacent areas during the period from February to March 1959. They were spotted by various independent witnesses, including the Russian Meteorology Service and the military. Some have suggested that some of these sightings were from the military test-firing rockets, but many of the reports of the sightings were on days when no rockets were being fired, and no doubt the military and meteorology departments would not have reported these incidents decades later as a mystery if they were rockets. Some reports have suggested that there was a great deal of scrap metal in and around the area, leading to speculation that the military had utilized the area secretly and might have been engaged in a cover-up. Compounding the mystery, one victim had a missing tongue and no eyes, and yet there is no indication of animals in the area, and the bodies would have been buried in the snow during the same time period in which they died, thus preserving the bodies. Another victim was missing lip tissue and some other tissue. One victim had a watch that stopped at 8:45 a.m., and his pocket had 310 rubles still in it. Other money was also located in the tent. All the victims were buried in zinc coffins without explanation by the Russian officials. The Russian government banned travel to the entire area for 3 years, though some snuck in anyway but didn't result in any known issues. The chief investigator absolutely refused to sign off on hypothermia as being the cause of death on the report and instead resigned from his position. One of the investigators was also taken off the case, but that appears to be the result of a high-level investigator being assigned. The final verdict was that the group members all died because of a, quote, compelling natural force. The inquiry was officially closed in May 1959 as a result of the absence of a guilty party. The files were archived and photocopies of the case became available only in the 1990s. According to archived reports, Lev Ivanov, the lead Soviet investigator on the case, collected a report from a group of hikers suggesting that something extraterrestrial may have resulted in the Dyatlov team's tragic demise. The report reads that the hikers were camping in an area about 32 miles south on the night in question, when they spied a series of strange orange spheres in the northern sky. Members of the same hiking group were later part of the search effort to locate the missing students, with one being taken to Moscow for unknown reasons at the time. But decades later, the hiker reported that the KGB told him not to speak about the spheres of light in the sky anymore, and he complied with the request. It's worth noting that during the next month after the incident, half the residents of the area reported similar anomalous aerial phenomenon. The lead Soviet investigator himself believed that these spheres might be involved with the unusual deaths, and in a 1990 interview, Ivanov claimed that he had been ordered to close the case and classify the findings as secret. This occurred just 1 day prior to receiving the final test results from the bodies, from samples that were sent to a lab just 10 days prior. Ivanov stated that officials were worried that reports of unidentified flying objects in the area by multiple witnesses, including members by the military and weather service, could result in some unnecessary speculation. In an interview with a small Soviet newspaper, Ivanov was alleged to have stated, quote, "I suspected at the time, and I am almost certain now, that these bright flying spheres had a direct connection to the group's death." End quote. The death of 9 Mansi tribe warriors years earlier, and that of the student skiers were not the only strange occurrences. There have been other unexplained incidents as well as aircraft that have inexplicably crashed in the area as a result of their systems shutting down, which later resulted in an unofficial no-fly zone over the area. It appears that this case could be related to the lost Eskimo village in Canada, as reported in part 1 of this video series. The first is that the tent in both cases was torn open. The second is whatever caused the people in both cases to immediately leave caused them to drop what they were doing and leave so quickly that they didn't even prepare for leaving. Perhaps the investigators in the Canadian case were not able to search the woods as well as they would have liked to, as the Russians were able to in their case, and if they had, then perhaps the Inuits would have been located in a similar condition as the professional Russian skiers were. Another observation is about the missing body parts. The Russian search and rescue teams, the Mansi tribe that helped in the search, and the police and military investigators reported at the time that the bodies were found that there was no animal tracks or evidence of animals in the area, and thus why the mountain is called Dead Mountain by the Mansi. The pathology report also didn't report any findings that would indicate animals were involved with the missing body parts. If you check into the details and images of the victims' bodies, which are available on the internet, and compare it to cattle mutilation reports, you will see some very close similarities. For example, the possible use of ultrasonic laser scalpel precision used to cut and remove tissue, where the cuts are so precise that the cutting instrument passes in between the individual cells, as reported by investigators. Also, in several cattle mutilations, the same tissue and type of damage is inflicted on the bodies. Unfortunately, human mutilation reports similar to cattle mutilation reports have been reported throughout the world, with many sites providing in-depth forensic evidence as well as autopsy images, though it is advisable not to seek this information out. In an attempt to gain the most accurate and widespread information on this report, information was gathered from numerous internet sites as well as from books, which included reading a book from a recent author who had traveled to Russia to investigate the incident. That author also ruled out all normal causes, and his Russian contact told him that one of their cars was damaged by the KGB upon the author's arrival as a warning. The author concluded that the deaths were the result of a low-level sound called infrasound, created by wind blowing across the top of a nearby mountain. Although interesting, it doesn't explain away the other anomalous evidence in the case. It should be noted that upon digging into this information on this case, some unusual images were located and appeared to show some form of entity in an old image that the students had taken. But once we analyzed the images closer, they were found to exhibit Photoshop marks on them and were thus left out of the images shown in this report. Although no one knows what caused the deaths of the victims, we do know this. The catalyst for their deaths was clearly not caused by an avalanche, a windstorm, an earthquake, an attack by humans, or an attack by any known animals, so what we are left with is something else. Again, the quote from Sherlock Holmes is relevant to this case. When you eliminate the impossible, what remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. Though in this case we are not left with enough evidence to point to anything as a definitive cause of death that has the ability to cause a bunch of professional skiers, hikers, geologists, ex-military individual, and engineers to exit a tent, cutting a hole at one end mind you, without shoes or proper clothing, and end up a mile from a tent at night in the freezing cold, and later located with a very unusual suntan, hair that turned white, and very odd damage to their bodies, and end up freezing to death 5 to 6 hours later. Remember to subscribe to this channel for free, and tune in tomorrow for more daily strange news. Don't forget to support our sponsors. Take care, and God bless.